I'm the Executive Director of the Center for European Studies, which includes the Curriculum in Contemporary European Studies and the Transatlantic Master's Program here at UNC. And I am thrilled, together with Zach Ward, who is the Student Services Manager for the Curriculum in Global Studies, to have planned tonight's event or this evening's event or this afternoon's event, depending on where you are. Zach and I have been working on this because we feel like this kind of event, right, to talk about global careers and what that actually means, whether it's a geographically global career or in terms of content or mindset, you know, global careers mean different things to different people. So we're here to talk about all those different options. And none of this could be possible without my fabulous friends and colleagues at the other area study centers in the Global Education Center, right? So we like to say we're the third floor. And those would be, of course, the African Studies Center, the Carolina Asia Center, the Center for Middle East and Islamic Studies, Shai's right here, the Center for Slavic, Eurasian, and East European Studies, the Institute for the Study of the Americas, which also includes the Curriculum in Latin American Studies. And then, of course, we have the UNC Russian Flagship Program and UNC Global co-hosting tonight. And of course, we're grateful to the UNC College of Arts and Sciences for their support. We also have many, many other colleagues across campus that support students in pursuing global opportunities. They've helped us get the word out about tonight, and we wish we could introduce you all to them in person, but we'll be sending out an information sheet on all different units and contacts and opportunities across campus, ranging from career services to the campus Y, you know, and everyone in between, Phillips ambassadors, study abroad, of course, Peace Corps, et cetera, that will give you information. Everyone who RSVP'd will be getting an email with this information so you can connect with units across campus that maybe you've been meaning to, or maybe you have never heard of. So we're hoping this sort of jumpstarts your connections with other units as well. And of course, we can't encourage you enough to ask a lot of questions. This is about getting your questions answered, having a dialogue. So please put your questions in the chat and direct them to Zach Ward. He will be fielding those questions to our panelists. Okay, so I have the pleasure of introducing our panelists. I'm going to start with Sarah Bidgood. She directs the Eurasia Non-Proliferation Program at the Center for Non-Proliferation Studies. She's also an adjunct professor at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in the Non-Proliferation and Terrorism Studies MA program. Her research focuses on US, Soviet, and US Russian non-proliferation and arms control cooperation. This is the most I've ever said non-proliferation in the span of a minute. And what is really interesting is that she served on the Secretariat of the 2015 Non-Proliferation Treaty, and she's been a member of the national delegation at each one of the last 3 preparatory committee meetings. She also leads the Young Women in Non-Proliferation Initiative, which aims to encourage more women undergraduates, US colleges and universities to consider careers in nuclear policy. She holds an MA in Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies from UNC Chapel Hill. She has a second MA in Non-Proliferation and Terrorism Studies from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey. She's a Russian speaker and graduate with a BA in Russian Language and Literature from Wellesley. She's currently also pursuing her PhD at King's College London, and she's going to also talk to us about how language scholarships helped her realize her dreams, including the Foreign Language Area Studies Award, as well as the Boren Scholarship. So we're looking forward. Welcome, Sarah. Now next we have Sarah Champagne, who graduated in journalism, international peace and conflict resolution from UNC Chapel Hill in May 2020, thanks to a Rotary Peace Fellowship. Sarah is a journalist. After graduating, she covered the COVID-19 peak in Texas for the Texas Tribune, and she's currently working on a documentary about migrant workers in Canada. She's back in Montreal. She has been, so anyone interested in journalism really needs to ask Sarah some questions tonight. She's contributed as a freelance reporter to publications such as the Christian Science Monitor and Geist magazine. She's written stories from about 15 different countries. And she's also the 2019 winner of the Overseas Press Club Foundation Award. She speaks many languages, and her journalism promotes dialogue, humanizes enemies, and sheds light on structural causes of violence. Welcome, Sarah. Next is Will Jarvis. Will says about himself, he's a technologist in his mid-20s, currently located in RTP. So someone right here in our area, someone local. See, global careers can also happen locally, right? He works on building startups and trying to develop the developed world. He runs marketing and operations right now for the machine learning startup Tango. And he's going to tell us more about what that is. He is often reading, or writing on effective altruism, public choice economics, finance, life extension, social science, essential risks, and cryonics. He also organizes the RTP Slate Star Codex meetup every month. Will graduated from UNC Travel in English and was a Phillips ambassador in Shanghai. So he's going to tell us a little bit more about that experience. Shout out to Phillips ambassadors. Melanie McAlister, welcome, is a professor of American Studies and International Affairs at George Washington University. She's a cultural historian focused on the US and the world, and has recently published The Kingdom of God Has No Borders, A Global History of American Evangelicals, with Oxford University Press in 2018. She's also co-editor of Volume 4 of the forthcoming Cambridge History of America and the World. She has written several books. She's a recipient of the NEH Fellowship, as well as fellowships from Princeton, the University of Pennsylvania. She is at the top of her field. She has a PhD in American Studies from Brown University and her BA in International Studies from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And she's going to talk to us a lot about her experiences, but also what teaching under COVID has meant and what it means to be adaptable. And last but not least, Hakeem Smith is a business analyst at Amazon, working for the talent development team with the Product Assurance Risk and Security Organization. And he's going to tell us more about what that exactly means. Before joining Amazon, he worked as a researcher and international project coordinator for the Czech Helsinki Committee, where he researched and wrote about migrant issues, Roma health and education, and modern forced sterilization. He's lived and worked in Europe, mainly in Prague, since 2012. He graduated from UNC with a BA in anthropology and returned to do the Transatlantic Master's Program in 2013, through which he studied at UNC in Bath and in Prague. Thank you so much to all of you for being here today. That was just to give you a little bit of sense who these fabulous people are, and we, again, encourage you to ask all sorts of questions and look forward to the discussion. Thanks, everyone. I'll turn it over to Zach.
Thanks, Katie. And I'd just like to echo, again, our sincere thanks for these outstanding alumni who have given so generously of their time to come and speak to our current students today. When Katie and I have been organizing these for many years, and you know, we always think that, and the feedback that we get in the area study centers and the curriculum global studies is that students have such kind of rich experiences in our programs, but as we approach graduation, there's always a little bit of anxiety about how do I translate these skills and experiences and opportunities into specific careers. And we always think year after year that our greatest resource in helping to answer these questions and calm this anxieties are our alumni. So again, thank you all for being here. The ways we'll go, there's a couple of kind of moderated questions we'll go through with our panelists, and then we will open it up to our Q&A. So again, please submit those questions in the chat box. I will get to them and try to get to as many as we can in the time allowed. But for panelists, I think that the first question, maybe the most basic question that I just wanted to ask you is, what made a globally oriented education initially attractive to you? And maybe if we don't mind, I'll just start off with like calling on the first person, then we can kind of go organically from there. But maybe Melanie, if you want to take the first kind of at bat with this question, if that's okay. Oh,
sorry. Hi, everybody. It's really nice to be talking to all of you. And I'm sure all of us could talk a lot about these things, so I'll try to keep it somewhat brief. But I have kind of two answers to what made me want to think about global issues. And I sort of felt like I was inventing a little bit of an international studies major when I was at UNC back a minute or two ago. But I had two reasons, and I think they're both real. One is I was from a very small town in North Carolina. I am from a very small town in North Carolina, and I wanted to know about the rest of the world outside that town. And going to college was like the best thing that ever happened to me. And then when I got to college, I realized there was a lot more to learn about. And I think part of it was just that sense of trying to expand my own sense of what was possible in the world, what the ways that people lived, the different attitudes and styles of life was just very exciting to me. And it's that simple at one level. But at another level, I was a Moorhead Scholar when I was at UNC, so I was very lucky to have those opportunities to travel during the summer and do internships at different places. But in 1982, okay, now you can do the math, but don't. I was an intern at Newsweek magazine for the summer, for the Moorhead summer. And I was assigned to the international affairs area, which was thrilling to me. And I was assigned to fact check stories on the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. Now, I think it's fair to say that at that point, I couldn't have found either Israel or Lebanon on a map. You know, I was doing my best, but I still had a lot to learn. And I joke, but it's also true that if I had been assigned to the Falkland War, I'd probably become a Latin Americanist. I mean, I was so interested in so many different things. But when I started paying attention to what was going on in the invasion there in the Middle East, I was really fascinated. But my interest became a justice issue, and it has been for me ever since. My interest in working on this issue fundamentally flows from an investment in trying to challenge and change fundamental aspects of U.S. foreign policy and the notion of America as doing things that I don't believe it should be doing in other parts of the world. And so for me, I'm interested in trying to address that with an attitude that is also about challenging ideas about American exceptionalism, both at a scholarly level, but also at a political level.
Thank you so much. I would kind of open it up to any of the other panelists if they wanted to.
I'll go because I have a similar answer than Melanie. Thank you so much for organizing this. I'm really happy to be with you online and to meet the other panelists. And I'm also from a small town, and so I took notes because I take notes for everything. I'm a stickler for notes as a journalist. And so I was born in a small village in Quebec, and it felt so small that I had to expand my horizons. And my parents had a food store in which they sold food from everywhere in the world, but we had to travel to Montreal 3 hours away to get this food. So I would sit in warehouses waiting for them and, you know, meeting people from elsewhere. And I think it really sparked my interest. Until today, I'm mostly focusing on migrants issues in Canada and elsewhere in the world. And so I think for me, UNC was also about having the Rotary Peace Fellowship. I wanted not only to have another degree, but also to strengthen my network around the world. And so I think that was the main goal for me. And obviously my English, because as you can hear, I'm not a native speaker. I'm a French speaker from Canada, and I live in French here in Montreal. We're 8 million people, just in case you haven't yet realized. Yeah, so I think that's it. If you have more questions about this specifically.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Anyone else who'd like to?
I'm happy to go, Zach. We can do 2 Sarahs in a row. So it's really nice to see everyone, and I really wish I were with you in person. I miss Chapel Hill quite a bit, and we've been watching The Last Dance, so it's been on my mind lately. You know, I think many of us must have a similar story. I'm also from a small town in Pennsylvania, and for me, the thing that sort of drove me to a globally oriented education was language. I really love foreign language. I feel like I'm a person who likes music. I have an ear for foreign language, and that's something I've always felt like I was good at and able to pick up quickly. And, you know, as you know, that can really drive the direction that your life takes when you feel like you have something that you're competent at and good at. And but it became so much more for me than just being able to kind of communicate with people. I felt like the more I studied foreign languages, and I began with French, but then kind of moved on to Russian, I just wanted to know more and more and more about different people. And that in and of itself became a real strength. I felt like the way that I can kind of contribute to making the world a better place is facilitating that kind of cross-cultural communication that is borne out by foreign language fluency. So Katie kindly plugged my some of the support that I received for that foreign language study. And in my undergraduate career, that came from a Boren scholarship. So I was able to spend a year living in also a relatively small town in Russia with a host family, learning how to speak Russian and really gaining that kind of fluency that those more challenging foreign languages take for Americans and for English speakers. And then I was able to continue that at Carolina in my master's degree program with a foreign language and area studies support. So, I think I wouldn't have put it this way as a student, because I'm not sure that I really had sort of the vocabulary to do this. But in retrospect, looking back, I think what I wanted to do was, be able to understand what drove people to kind of behave in the ways that they did. Why do people perceive the threats that they do? Why do they enjoy the things that they do? And now today in my work, I think a lot about that in the context of how do we do policy making and the implementation of policy. So I'm happy to sort of talk more about that. I do just want to note, because I was struck by Katie mentioning how many times she said the word non-proliferation in my bio, which is extraordinary. And I don't know why they make it such a difficult word, but just so we're kind of all on the same page, it means, preventing the spread of weapons of mass destruction. So if you're sort of silently wondering what we're talking about, that's just a little cue for you. And I hope you will ask questions about that, because I love to talk about that work. So back to you, Zach. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Maybe Hakeem next. That's okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, let me just echo everybody else and say, thank you to Zach and Katie for setting this up, and happy to speak with all the students and everyone today. I also have to echo a lot of what Melanie said, and Sarah and the two Sarahs. And also come at it from a different side from Sarah, because at UNC I started, and I mean Sarah Bidgood, sorry. I know now I have to be like really clear who I'm talking about. So as an undergrad at UNC, I was an anthropology major. I was really interested in why people did things in other ways of being. I'm a Black man from the American South, so like Melanie, very early on, it was pretty clear that the narrative and the reality were two different things growing up in America. And so what was the rest of the world sort of doing? And but language, unlike Sarah Bidgood, was a barrier for me. I like maybe many people of my generation, I studied Spanish and or studied is a strong word, but I was in Spanish class and I should have been able to speak some, but it didn't sort of really lend any entrance for me to looking at this anything globally. But I did actually marry a European, and that sort of snapped everything into focus for me. And it spending time, in Europe before actual grad school changed a lot. Maybe I'm like Melanie. If I'd married someone from South America, I would have learned different lessons. But I could see the difference in the narrative of what I learned about what Europe, or at least Central Europe, so former socialist countries, those lessons of the Cold War. The reality was slightly different, and so how do you reconcile those things? And then I sort of got hooked, not by the differences, but by the similarities. And then I, studying in TAM, the theory side also got me hook, line, and sinker. So, I just pursued that for as far as I could take it, and I use it every day in the work that I do. be happy to talk about that with folks.
Thanks so much, Hakeem. Last but not least, Will, is there?
Sure. Yeah. So I'd like to echo a lot of things a lot of the other panelists have already talked about. I'm from rural Eastern North Carolina, very insular community that was also, it's kind of a bombed out mill town. And it's kind of a China shock thing where the mills all went to China and other developing countries. And now suddenly, like what's left. And so I've been interested in these issues of globalization, these different perspectives. How do we make the world better in ways that are kind of Pareto optimal for everyone? So everybody wins instead of just, it's a trade-off where maybe one group of people wins and one group of people loses. And so making the world less zero sum is something I've always been interested in. And how do we do that in a productive way?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Will. Going from kind of the abstract to maybe a little bit more specific, what kind of skills, competencies do you find most crucial in your work? And to add an additional layer to it for our times, maybe in the context of COVID, but also, maybe more generally speaking, can you discuss the role of adaptability in your careers, both kind of short term and long term? And I don't know, maybe Sarah Champagne, if you want to start off with this first, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So I actually read the first part of your question and I started writing adaptability, and then I read the second part. So I think it's really the main quality that you should have in journalism. And then there's a really wide areas of skills that are useful in journalism. So sometimes people think of reporter or freelancer as just sitting down and writing, and when some people do that, but a lot of journalists, especially in the beginning, will want to know more into one specific subject. I'm not sure if I'm explaining myself. I think one ability that is really transferable to any field is it's simple, and at the same time it's not that simple, is the ability to be comfortable around people. Every day, almost every day, I pick up the phone and I call someone I don't know, and I have to present myself. So, presenting yourself, describing your work really briefly, and then asking what you want to ask are skills that are transferable to any other field. I think in journalism, if you want to be a good journalist and have enough adaptability to be hired for a variety of positions, you both have to be someone very accessible. You have to be able to create a space for people to trust you, to sometimes they will tell you their life that they've never told to anyone else, their life from A to Z. And at the same time, in other moments, you have to be someone very assertive, very sharp, ask challenging questions to power and hold institutions accountable. So I think having both of these sides is very useful in my job. Obviously, you have to be hardworking because it's not an easy job. And I think all of you know that, but the media is in crisis. But at the same time, it really gives you back, it brings you back to the fundamental question is how to be relevant in this world, and what can you bring to the audience, and what can you bring to the public. And I think for me, circling back to the first question, studying in the US in a globally oriented university or program, I really wanted to understand the US from within. I had never spent time in the US for so long. So I've traveled a lot, and I've lived elsewhere in Italy and Argentina and Benin and West Africa, but I had not stayed more than 2 weeks in the US. So, having that sense of far away places, but also what's your own place in the world. And I think being in North Carolina gave me that sense. And as a journalist, it's a very important skill to be conscious of, to be self-conscious of what's your position from where you're writing about other communities. So I'm going to stop there.
Thanks for that insight. I open it up for any of the other panelists if they.
So for me, I think the most important thing is something I call definite optimism. So you should look at your career, you should be optimistic about it. But I think too many people overrate optimism, indefinite optimism. So it just, my career will be better in the future in some amorphous way. So I got in trouble. I wrote this piece for the business school when I was at Carolina. I was an English major. And I said, too many of our business school graduates and smart graduates are going to work in consulting at McKinsey, et cetera. And it's just like a resume line item. You make a lot of money. It's high optionality. So, it's for your next job, but you don't know what your next job is. And you're not going to take the time to sit down for 2 weeks and think, what do I really want to solve? Like, what problem do I want to work on for the world? So I think, coming up with a definite plan and making it happen is somewhat underrated. So like trying to think, what's the problem I want to solve? Like for me, like what problem in the world out there do I want to attack and work on? And if you actually you can formulate a plan, I think, and just sitting down and critically thinking about that is really important.
Zach, I can jump in here too and kind of pick up on some of these themes. So, you can tell I'm really stuck on this issue of language, but one of the things that I think is so important in the work that my colleagues and I do that I would not have known before I'd kind of gotten into this field is the ability to translate concepts that aren't really familiar to a lot of people or aren't really part of our kind of domestic lexicon and discourse into things that people feel like they deserve and are able to have an opinion about. And I think, nuclear issues and nuclear policy issues in particular, as they relate to kind of weapons and defense, can feel really far away from our immediate consciousness. And I understand why that's the case. We're all dealing with a lot of really challenging issues that take up a lot of bandwidth and should take up a lot of our bandwidth. But one of the things that I think is important to be able to do in a job like mine is to help people understand how they can engage with these difficult, sensitive topics and feel like they can bring their own authentic experience and own authentic thoughts to bear when it comes to making decisions around policy from a constituency perspective. And so that's something that I think I didn't realize was important, but it now makes me understand why I was so drawn to a career in this space, because it really is another way of translating something so that a different audience can consume it. So that's something that I have found to be really important in my work, and it continues to be really important, especially as we're in this virtual environment. That type of communication, finding ways to continue to make it possible for different stakeholders to be part of the conversation, even when we can't be physically together, has been a new challenge, but I think it's something my colleagues and I have been able to take on successfully.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I think that was really insightful. Hakeem or Melanie, I don't want to necessarily put anybody on the spot again, but
I'll jump in. Just because I'll again come at this from a different angle, and I have to agree with everything that everyone said before. I have my answers here, and you're hitting all the spots, especially with communication. And so I'll say that for me, other than the fundamentals that you learn at a university like UNC, those do come into play every day for me, especially things like research and as Will said, formulating an actual question. Like that's very important, and fewer people know how to do that than you would assume. But I'll say soft skills really they come into play a lot, and especially now something like empathy is maybe more needed than we've seen in a while. And what I've noticed lately that's actually, and this goes to some of the things we've been talking about justice and things like that, that sort of understanding and navigating these things that we are encapsulating under the umbrella of like diversity, equity, and inclusion. So understanding that terminology and those principles, and then applying those in everything that you do and allowing for them just to exist, I think are some very important competencies that folks can use more today.
So I think I don't have a lot to add, but I'll add a couple of things. I think everything people have said makes sense. I would add, there are different components, I guess, for all of us of my job. When I'm thinking about the research and writing component, I mean, obviously the skills you learn as a student are really important. I would add to it, curiosity is crucial. I'm sure Sarah would say that, but maybe all of us would say you have to be curious about things. And I think you also have to be really willing to be wrong and to risk being wrong. And, many times in the humanities and social sciences, it's not clear who's right and who's wrong, but you certainly, there are times when you do something and it doesn't work out or you get it wrong. And you have to be willing to sort of tolerate that in order to learn and to grow. The other thing I'll add, and I was really glad when Katie did this at the beginning, when she mentioned several times that global careers don't necessarily mean globe trotting, that those are different things. And that I think there's also a difference between a global career, if you define that as careerism in a global context, versus an international perspective that you can engage in a lot of different contexts. And so I'll just mention really quickly, I had two students who had met in their freshman year in my class many years ago, about 12 years ago now, and I'm still in touch with both of them. And one of them is an Arab American woman who is fluent in Arabic, knows some French, went to law school and public policy school at Harvard, has traveled all over the world. She now works pretty high up in the State Department, the US State Department, but she's worked for the Hague and done stuff at the World Bank. And she's done all of the things that's kind of a fantasy of a global career. I mean, she's really quite extraordinary, but she's been very lucky. But her best friend and someone else is now, he went, he's a gay guy from Florida, white guy, she went to Harvard, he went to Yale Business School, and he came out and got a job at Google, his first job there was helping Google give away money, which is also a pretty great job. But he really brought into it, in part from his perspective as having a global perspective, that Google needed to take seriously international issues and justice issues from his little, house in California. He doesn't hardly traveled at all, but he understood what it meant to take that seriously. And so I just think that that's an important thing for all of us to remember, that, I teach at GW. There's a lot of people who have careerism in a global context, which is not necessarily the kind of global perspective I'd like to see them most pursue.
I think that's really important. I think that's something that we always in the GEC, again, when we emphasize the local is global, it's so important to keep these mindsets at hand when we discuss career opportunities. So thank you all for your insight. I did have a question from a student just wanting to clarify soft skills. What does that mean? And soft skills, we oftentimes talk in these conversations about, is there, in terms of competencies, is there methodological backgrounds? Are there certain programs, software packages that people know? And those are things that we see and talk a lot about in Incentivize. The soft skills that Hakeem kind of specifically targeted, interpersonal skills, time management, empathy. These are the things that we don't oftentimes know how to quantify or represent, but they're just as important in the modern workplace. And I would say doubly so in times of COVID, when we're trying to navigate virtual settings. So just wanted to answer that question a little bit from a student. The last question that I had before we get into the Q&A from students. So please, students listening, send more questions along. We've gotten a few, but please feel free to go ahead and start submitting. What's one piece of practical advice you would give to someone starting out? Thinking back to your experiences or your knowledge of the landscape in which we find ourselves in right now, what's something that you would tell students to kind of cling to or suggest as they're wrapping up time or thinking about wrapping up their time here as a Tar Heel?
So I've got one. I think this was really helpful to me. I got this from someone else, but when you're job hunting, this is super practical, and you can use this. And if you have any questions, please email me, and I can help you craft these. But if you're job hunting, go out, take a whole Saturday, think, what do I want to do? What would be the 10 to 20 coolest organizations or people I would like to work for? Find the CEO's email. I can direct you to software to do like that will help you do this. and craft an email that is, and spend an hour on each email. Craft it, try and be really empathetic, use those soft skills Hakeem talked about, and think, what are the biggest problems this person has? And you spend an hour, you can probably get pretty close and come up with a way to help them solve those problems. Include that in the email and send those out Tuesday, 10 a.m. It's the best time, trust me. And you'd be surprised at the amount of people that will get back to you. And no one does this. I did this I helped a friend get a job at a CEO, with the CEO of a unicorn startup, which everyone's heard of on this call last week doing this. It was just a DM on Twitter. So I really recommend people, if there's people you look up to in the world, they're all people just like us, and they all have email, and most of them will respond if you put some time and effort into it. You might have to follow up a couple times, but you'd be amazed at your response rate. It might be 70% or higher. So it's worth taking the time to do that.
Thanks so much, Will. Is there anyone else who might want to? Okay.
Sarah, other Sarah, do you want to go first? Okay, I'll go. So I was so struck by what Hakeem said about soft skills. So I just want to kind of amplify that, because I think that that's something that has been, crucially important in my job. And I think to the extent that it's possible for people to develop a sense of empathy and really practice the kinds of thinking that let you be empathetic. So kind of interrogating your own presuppositions about, why do I feel the way that I do? Why might another person feel the way that he or she does? You can develop those kinds of skills. And I think that that's really important to do in your work. But the other side of that, I think, is developing a sense for, what do you truly believe? What do you find to be important? And I know this isn't the case for everybody, but, as an adult now, my main kind of creative outlet that I have is writing. And I do write a lot in my work. And we do different kinds of writing in the space that I work in. Sometimes it's academic and very theory oriented, but other times it's op-ed writing, or writing for a more public audience, something that's not going to be behind a paywall, that could be designed to reach a lot of people, policymakers and the general public alike. And I think, to the extent that it's possible for you to do this as you are sort of preparing to graduate and thinking about those next career steps, start to develop these kinds of portfolio pieces that you can share with potential employers, that you can share with a graduate school admissions committee if you're thinking about applying to grad school. And the benefit of doing this type of work is twofold. One, you have something to show for yourself. You can say, I have written this, 800 to 1,000 word op-ed. It was published in Foreign Policy. Here are my viewpoints about X, Y, and Z thing. Take a look. But the other benefit is that I think it allows you to cultivate an authentic sense of yourself and what you're going to bring to the conversation. And that can be really hard to do. I know when I was first starting out in this field, I felt like, my own authentic voice is not going to be interesting to anyone. My own experiences won't be interesting. What I need to do is basically memorize rote facts and be able to talk really competently about the issues I'm working on. And as I've moved farther along in my field, it's become very clear to me that that's actually not what's interesting. What's interesting is, what I learned from being a Russian language and literature major, how I can bring in that cultural aspect to hard security issues, how I can bring in my perspectives as a person from a small town to talk about what might be of interest to the general public when it comes to nuclear policy. And so I think the act of doing that writing, the act of creating those portfolio pieces, is the kind of thing that can let you develop a sense of yourself and what your own goals are, and those goals that Will was talking about. So that's what I would recommend. And I'm, again, always happy, as others have said on the call, to kind of engage with you if you're working on doing that.
Yeah, so I want to amplify every bit of things that's been said up until now. I think I agree with Sarah about foreign languages, but don't just learn them, just practice them also as soon as you can. How many people, when I was in the States, have told me, oh, I've taken French, but they don't even say bonjour or merci, or do you want to have a coffee so we can speak French? So take every opportunity to really practice them. And I also have another really general piece of advice. I think don't just think about the idea of the job that you want, the title that you want, or the cool company that you want to work for. Think about your day-to-day. My first job out of college, I was very unhappy. I really liked the idea. I was not in journalism. It was an environment. I was managing a million fund for green initiatives. And I really like the idea, and I like my title, and I like to say to friends and other people, oh, this is what I do, but I hated my day-to-day. I didn't like to be sitting in front of a computer 100% of the time. So that's also one reason why I became a journalist. And I think the question of what is important to you is also central to this. What are you going to do every day of the next 50 years? And I think if a sense of purpose is really important to you, then find this place where you're going to feel you have a sense of purpose in your life.
Thanks so much, Sarah.
I don't have a lot to add to that, but I was going to say, no matter how good a writer you are, get better at it, because that's the single thing that people I know who are hiring find, and I still think it's an issue. And I guess the other thing I would think is that really being willing to listen and learn in all sorts of different environments where you are, so that even if you're not, actually, I want to say something about what Sarah said. Sarah said she was doing something else and she realized she didn't like it. I started out as a journalism major and realized really early on that I was really uncomfortable going up to strangers and asking them questions. Now, my last book, I spent all sorts of time going up to strangers and asking them questions, but I was not, that was 20 years later, it took a while. And so knowing who you are, I think, is really important, but also being curious is, of course, again, it's just, you can't overestimate how much you can learn in even terrible jobs that seem like they're not taking you anywhere. But if you're activating and listening to the people around you, you will find stuff that is helpful to you and maybe to the world even.
So my practical bit of advice is to increase your data literacy. This is because I work at Amazon and we have tons of data. This comes up all the time. The world has, in the media especially, there's lots of good and bad data visualizations. I hate to use that term, but I'll use it. Out there with COVID, that's a really good, unfortunately, there's plenty of data around COVID that you can use to sort of increase your data literacy, and lots of really good journals out there. If you folks run across, The Economist is a really good one. That's the practical advice. It will come in handy regardless of what you do. On the sort of more general side, I'd like to ask you all, especially because you're students now and you have time to fail, and a couple of folks have mentioned this before, but learn to, or try to learn to be comfortable in discomfort. It's difficult to put this into like a really clear way, but resiliency is a muscle that you have to exercise and develop. And it's important to put yourself, especially if you're, globally focused, to put yourself in situations where maybe you are uncomfortable, maybe you have, a lot less information than everybody else in the room, but you will get through the other side of it. It won't take as long as you think it will. And once you're on the other side, you'll have gained more knowledge than you could have if you were just researching that subject. So I would encourage you all to find those places where maybe you're not so good, or maybe you find it difficult, and just put yourself there over and over again.
I just want to add to that because I think it's so important. And I will say, we've been talking a lot about languages, and I lived in Cairo for a year after I graduated, and I was working on learning Arabic, and I was actually pretty good in context. I could get around quite well and speak pretty well, but I was not great at it. And I was used to being, really smart. And so I didn't like being not great at it. I really didn't like it, actually. And so I think that is one of the reasons I didn't pursue it as much as I could have. I mean, I can still move around, but I ended up thinking this is not, I'm not ever going to be good enough at languages to do Middle East studies. And so that was probably true, but it was still not the best choice to make, because I didn't like being uncomfortable or not as good at it. So I think that's something to really, I want to underline that.
Thank you all so much. I think those were all great responses that really built off each other. I'll start getting into the questions that we've received from students. So the first question I have, essentially, the student is currently a poli-sci major with a minor in global studies, and at the moment does not plan immediately to go to graduate school. Would this degree be sufficient for work abroad, or part of an initial job, or what's the landscape looking like in terms of competitiveness coming out with just an undergraduate degree or possibly going to graduate school?
Well, I think for my field, you know, generally most people do tend to have a graduate degree. Sometimes it's just it'll just be a master's degree. It won't be a PhD, in part because sort of having policy experience and having worked in Washington or at an international organization, a UN organization, can really substitute for having a PhD to some extent. But I have noticed increasingly, it seems like there is a trend towards hiring entry-level positions that do not require a master's degree. And so I do think that the landscape, at least in my space, is changing a little bit to give people more of an opportunity to go right in from an undergraduate experience to an entry-level job. And I personally think that that's great. We have we are really working hard in our space to increase the diverse voices that are contributing to these really difficult issues. And part of that is recognizing that graduate school is not a realistic possibility for every single person. And so I've been very happy and heartened to see that we're moving towards this very different modalities for getting people involved in the field. I'll just give a quick plug for our organization, the Center for Nonproliferation Studies. We do have paid summer undergraduate internships. So if that's the kind of thing that is of interest to you and you want to test it out and get your feet wet, I'm happy to connect you with those folks on the CNS side.
Thank you for that, Sarah.
I can speak for journalism. It's really not the degrees that you have, but your portfolio. So as other people have said, just do it. Just write and pitch and try to have internships. I think even with an undergrad, you can become a great journalist. Graduate school is great if you want to be a beat reporter. So if you want to write only on specialized issues, so having a graduate degree is useful for that.
I think it's also important to mention, so I hire a lot of people now, and we don't hire a degree. Like, I don't think many people hire for degrees, and there's special cases, right? So you have to be an attorney to do this job, you have to be a doctor to do this job, but generally what I'm hiring for is I need someone that will solve my problem today, whatever that problem is. And for example, for developers, I hire a lot of software engineers. The last 4 I've hired them all out of a boot camp called Lambda School. Half of them were like bartenders before they started, and they're very competent. They spend a lot of time coding. They're nothing like, I haven't hired a BS in computer science. I can't remember how long. And so my point being is, think about, okay, what is the target, company I want to work at? What is their biggest problem? What are the biggest issues they're dealing with? Could I, help them on the sales side? Every organization has a sales side. The university has a sales side. They're asking the development officers. Is that something I could help with as a political science major? Is it grant writing? What does that look like? Is it actual research? Could I create some examples of research that would be helpful? So just thinking about that, what special skills do I have? Am I good at writing? Am I good at selling? These are all things you can build that will be very valuable.
I can't agree with Will more about folks that maybe come from non-traditional backgrounds. The previous team I worked on in Amazon, one person sitting beside me had a bachelor's degree. The person sitting on the other side of me had a dual master's degrees. So the whole spectrum was there. I can tell you at Amazon, a master's degree is not a requirement. Bachelor's degree is no barrier to entry. Amazon is a very large company with huge scale, and like Will said, everything is there. So we even have sales. So if you find something that's there, I would take the advice of a lot of folks here and just pursue it.
Great. The next question that somebody posed, and I think this is you know, in the context of COVID specifically, I think it's important. I would like to ask about advice, trying to get some sort of global perspective, summer experience, despite having limited ability to travel due to COVID. I mean, and this is something we're all dealing with, right? I mean, I think about it a lot. I know Katie thinks about it a lot in regards to our students and the programs that we typically support in a normal summer, and trying to ensure that students have those kind of experiences. But do you have any thoughts or suggestions about how students can maybe navigate those possibilities, and with the likelihood being that they may not be able to travel abroad for some of these experiences?
I can jump in on that. I think that there are lots of ways to do it, but one very important way is to think about looking at not just a Twitter feed from Paris, although that could be good, or, you know, those kinds of things, but actually reading broadly, reading literature, listening to music, watching movies, and really paying attention in that way. Actually, the next book I'm writing is going to be called Third Worlding, and it's going to be how culture played a role in shaping how Americans began to think about solidarity and political decolonization as something they might affirm and get behind in the 70s and 80s. And I'm looking at novels and music and art as venues for that, how people begin to learn and think outside their own context. And so thinking about the best-selling Latin American novelists, or Bob Marley as a musician, or some of those folks who made a difference, and they taught a lot of people. I mean, you didn't have to go to South Africa in the 1980s to learn about apartheid, and you don't have to travel around the world to learn about the inequalities of COVID, economic crises in different places in the world, or about the politics of race and racism as it crosses all sorts of national boundaries. So I think that, you know, everybody wants to travel if they can, sure, but I don't think we need to think that that's the, you know, that COVID has made these things impossible. It really hasn't.
I want to second that too, actually, because I've been sort of thinking about this in the context of my own PhD research, because I obviously can't travel either, and kind of working with materials that I have available in Monterey, California. And I have benefited tremendously from the digitized archival resources that we now have available to conduct research. So in addition to, you know, what Melanie was mentioning, kind of understanding this bigger context, you can also do really interesting archival and primary source research from the comfort of your own home these days. So I would encourage you, for those of you who are interested in kind of policy-oriented history, looking at the foreign relations of the United States documents, which are all available through the US Department of State and are constantly being updated and reviewed and released. Those are things that can be really valuable. For those of you who are Russian speakers on the line, Rosatom, which is the Russian State Atomic Energy Agency, has a really fantastic digitized history of the Soviet atomic bomb project. You can look at that online. These are things that you can study at home and sort of develop a documentary record to use for yourself in your own research. And that's something that I've found to be exceptionally useful.
I just want to add to that you could think about having an internship for an international organization or something globally oriented. Most of the COVID that I covered in Texas, I was actually in Montreal because they had told me not to go. I mean, the editor of the Texas Tribune was really well aware that it was complicated to move. It was at the start of the pandemic. I think it would be different now, but yeah, travel internationally is hard. You can't even come to Canada. So yeah, having an internship abroad, but while in the US, why not?
I think that's all really important feedback. Thank you for that. This is a question we just got from a student. Since immersion learning is commonly promoted as the ideal for extensive language learning, do you have any potential recommendations that could help undergraduate language learners expand their proficiency in times of virtual schooling? I think we kind of just hit on some of these themes with this question, but just wanted to put that out there for the panel.
Well, I can say very practically, I think a lot of organizations that have traditionally done in-depth language learning in an in-person setting have, at least in the past year, I don't know what things will look like going forward, of course, because this landscape is so dynamic, but they have been able to move some of that language learning online. So for instance, I know, Middlebury, which is one of the big language learning institutions in our country, they were able to move some of their in-person immersive learning activities online. The same thing with Indiana University, which has a really fantastic Slavic language program. I believe that they were able to do a lot of those activities online over the summer too. So I wouldn't be deterred by assuming that the types of language learning you want to do aren't possible because of the constraints of COVID. I would still, go ahead and check them out, look them up online, email the program organizers, and just see what kinds of accommodations they've been able to put into place, because it's really extraordinary what people are able to do on Zoom, as we all well know from the last year.
I just want to add to that. If you find someone in your community, I'm not sure what the restrictions are right now in North Carolina, but I'm thinking if you find someone who speaks the language that you're trying to learn, go and do the groceries with that person, or go for a walk, or go for whatever is permitted right now with COVID.
There's actually a question. I think it's a really great question, and I'm not just saying that to if Shai's still on the call, but if not, he should pay me from our very own Shai Tamari. There's this statement that he offers, and he would like kind of the reflection of panelists on this. A potential employer won't remember what you said at an interview. They will remember how you made them feel. Can you kind of reflect on that sentiment, and if that rings true for any of you in current or previous roles?
That's a really excellent point. That's really excellent. Yes, yeah, I think that's one thing people often don't realize is how important, like emotions rule everything, especially in that context. And that's the sales context, right? And one of the best things I can say, there's a great, if anyone's done anything in tech, Y Combinator is kind of the resource for startup school. Hakeem's probably heard of it. But they have a great sales lecture by a guy named Tyler. I can't remember. I'll put it on my website so people can find it. But essentially, you want to ask questions and you want to listen. And if you're really good at listening, that's mostly what sales is listening. And people think it's like Don Draper with like smoking a cigar and doing whatever with an ad agency, but really it's listening to people. And the better you are at that, I think the better results you'll get.
Thanks so much, Will.
I don't know, smart people make me happy, so I think it could be both. I think that I would feel good if somebody came in and seemed like they knew a lot and had lots of skills. And I'm gonna beg to a little bit differ with that, but I don't do as much hiring as some of you all do, so I could be wrong.
Anyone else before I move on? There's this question, and I think I have to ask it because we're at UNC, and because I think it's maybe a really apt question. If you can remember, what are some of the classes at UNC that taught you the most valuable life skills? Maybe, if you can't remember specifics, maybe professors or areas, but yeah, valuable life skills at UNC.
It's a pity because I think Shai is gone, but he's gonna have to pay me for that. But I think what I really remember, so I graduated just back last May, in May 2020, so it's very fresh to me, but the class of negotiation and conflict resolution and mediation was really the one I'm applying every day now in my life. So being able to listen, obviously, as a journalist, is very important, but not only with people you interview, but with your colleagues, with your boss, with your soulmate even. I think it makes your life better and not just in a professional way, in a personal way. So I think the skill of being able to state your interest, be able to put yourself in other people's shoe is a skill I learned I better in the negotiation class. That I think it's given almost every semester at UNC, so check it out.
I have a couple of classes, and I am ashamed that I can't remember the exact names of them. But so, my experience is a little bit different from some folks on the line because I was at Carolina for a graduate program, a master's degree program. But one of the degree requirements was to take a pro seminar where we learned how to do different types of research. We learned how to do things like how do you write a review of a book if you're asked to review a book? How do you do historiography, not just history, but how do you do the study of history? And those are skills that I use all the time in my research now. And I think they were taught in a way that made them feel really approachable, especially for a person who had done, basically a liberal arts undergraduate degree and was coming into this more social science and policy oriented space. So those are things that I often reach back and use in my work today. And I also I have to, we've been sort of talking about different jobs that people have that maybe don't seem directly related to the careers that they ended up going into. But, I worked at the Digital Production Center. That was my student job at Carolina. And that has transformed the way that I think about how knowledge is shared and transmitted, and how I understand the ways that digitization works and how that makes material accessible to people who wouldn't necessarily have access to it otherwise, how it expands our world in our own backyard. And so I do just have to give a shout out to the DPC and to the people who are working to make those resources available in our campus infrastructure and in our libraries that we have. That's really important for a person living in California and not in Washington, D.C., to being able to do the kinds of work that I do. So again, just, every life experience feeds into something that happens down the line, even if you don't see exactly how it's related at the time. That sounds very cheesy, but it's something that has proven true in my life.
I have to just agree with the last part of that statement. Absolutely, Sarah. At UNC, so we had a question that Zach prepped us for that we actually didn't go over, but this question connects directly because I can, mentally, of course, I can draw a direct line between the job I have now and the work that I do to a class in the transatlantic master's program. So John Stevens was the director, or is the director, of the transatlantic master's program. And but John has he's going to kill me because I can't remember the name of his class, but it doesn't matter. What you need to know is that the book is by Espen Andersen, and diving into these theories and the data behind all of this, welfare capitalism, thank you, but all of this, all of that work prepared me for the things that I do every day. And this goes back to what I talked about when I mentioned data literacy. It goes back to what I talked about when I talked about defining a problem statement. All of this work was, let's call that the crucible where my ability to do that was forged.
I think for me, it was a class on Milton, John Milton's Paradise Lost with Reed Barbour, which I highly recommend. Maybe less so with COVID, but he would come in, it's an hour and a half long, take his shoes off, no notes, and he could lecture through the entire text for an hour and a half. And he did this week after week. And I learned so much about how to organize my life and what was valuable to me through reading texts that are a lot older than any of us. I think a lot of us end up having this time arrogance for the present day. And we forget that people have been thinking about this stuff for a long time and how to lead a good life. And so just, sitting down and thinking, what's valuable to me and what do I want to do with my time, my short time here? I think it gets lost in the daily shuffle with everything going on. You got to get groceries, you got to walk the dog, but I think it's really important.
I'm so glad to have the question about the professors. That makes me very happy. But I'll mention actually something I did with Professor Rule Tyson, who passed away a few years ago. And he taught in the religion department. And he actually had a reading group for students outside of his class, students who'd taken classes with him. And he had us reading the Milton reference is what inspired me to say this. He had us reading Middlemarch, George Eliot's Middlemarch, for the whole year. So we'd meet like they used to do in Victorian era. We'd meet and we discuss like a couple of chapters each week. And I loved, Middlemarch is a book I, still give some of my students when they graduate. I loved the book and the way he made us use it to think about our own lives and what success was and what love was and all of those things. But I think in my own job, what I try to take from that is how much respect he showed us as students. That he really believed that we as students had things to say that wasn't like, oh yeah, I heard that 25 years ago. It was really like he listened, he was engaged, he cared about us as people, and he respected us and what we were thinking and our interpretations of things. And I've really tried to carry that into my own teaching with my students to really recognize. And believe me, students will, if you're willing to pay attention, they'll make clear that, you got things to learn all the time. I remember when my students last fall, or maybe, I think it was, anyway, maybe it was last spring, but they had to tell me what WAP was. And, I was like, okay, I'm going to be cool. I can handle this. I'm ready. Let's go ahead, say the lyrics. Let's do it. So, there's that level of learning, but there's also the level of learning from having students who come up in very different circumstances, whose diversity in terms of gender identity, racial background, national background, and values and just age is very, very different. I think all of us, and just come back to COVID, 20 years ago, I've been teaching at GW about 25 years. 20 years ago, I had students whose lives I knew were going to be shaped by the fact that 9/11 happened when they were 18 years old, and that was going to shape so much of their experience. And now I'm having students I know who are going to be very different people than I am, or any of us who are already graduated, because their college experience has been so fundamentally shaped and damaged in some ways, but certainly changed by COVID, and it's changing for all of you, like going out into the world, looking for jobs. I'm sorry, this is really a hard time to be doing it. But you will have strengths and knowledge and flexibility, talk about adaptability, that other people don't have. I mean, I'm not trying to be Pollyannish about it, but it does teach things, and it does create new opportunities for people to learn some things about themselves and how they work with other people to bring out into the world. So, you have things to bring to the world. I know you know that, and this horrible last year, has really shaped all of us, but probably shaped you in ways you will only begin to learn in a few years.
Thank you for that, Melanie. I think it's really, really important for us all to hear. I want to, if there's anybody else who feels compelled to say anything, if not, we'll move on to, for the interest of time and to respect everyone's time here, we'll move on to maybe the last question. And it's actually interesting because we had talked about this in prepping for this discussion about work-life balance, and that is one of the questions that's come up. Is can you just speak about what work-life balance kind of looks like for you in your role and your organization, and maybe how that conception has evolved over time?
I'll jump in. We at Amazon we talk about something that's called work-life harmony. So we're trying to find harmony between these two different aspects of our lives. And with COVID, of course, it finding the harmony gets more and more difficult. But I think that so even at the best of times, it is difficult. It's for me, it's a I'll just speak about my experience. It is constantly shifting priorities and focus find the harmony between the two. I mean, this isn't work. This is personal for me, but it's after 11 p.m. where I am, and I'm wearing a headset because my kids are asleep in the next room, right? So every, I hold meetings at certain times just to get around, their school and things like that. So although it is difficult, it is sort of it's a constant, it takes constant management, I believe, and I think that in the present situation, we're all coming to terms with the fact that this concept was maybe flawed to begin with, and the reality is something else. But like Melanie was saying earlier, we will learn more in a few years.
Warren Buffett has this idea of, and Hakeem, you mentioned family, and this made me think of it. Create a list of your priorities, and cut it down, and then cut it in half or whatever, and then that's what you can accomplish in your life. And I like to, so I keep a spreadsheet with my priorities, and I'll try to look at it once a week on Sunday nights, and just make sure what I'm doing every day is matching those priorities. And if I need to update them, that's good. And I ask my friends to help me, because I don't know, and friends and family to look at it and say, does this match what you think I should be doing, and get feedback? Because sometimes we're bad at looking at ourselves and understanding what we're good at and what we're not good at, and what do we need to do, and what we find valuable. And as long as what you're doing in your work and in your life is matching your priorities, I think you're fine. Sometimes you're doing something mission driven. For Sarah, that might be something like, we're going to stop global thermonuclear war, and this is really important, and this is like, and you might spend a ton of time on that, and and you don't have time to do other things. But as long as it matches priorities, that's okay. And I think that's the important thing. It's different for each person, but I think people get out of whack when they start, maybe they're not spending time with their family, and spending too much time on work, and their priorities, there's a mismatch. So you just try to do that to your best of your ability. It's hard, and it takes time, and it's work, but something to think about.
I love that idea so much. Well, I'm actually going to start doing that. I think having a sort of check in with yourself and figuring out, am I really living what I uphold to be my values, but, professionally and personally, and is this all in balance? I think that's something that is really important. I think, from speaking for myself personally, the kind of breakdown between professional and personal life that has resulted from doing all of your work from your house, that's something that is really challenging. And I think in general in our country, we tend to kind of fetishize working constantly and constantly being at work. It took me a while, and I'm still terrible at this, to kind of recognize that working constantly and doing quality work are not synonymous with one another. And so knowing that, I'm getting burned out, or I'm feeling really exhausted and uninspired, knowing that those are kind of signs for you that maybe you need to take a step back or recalibrate a little bit, or check in with yourself about your own priorities, is something that is really valuable. And, just to go back to a point that I think someone made, or actually a number of people made earlier, those are the kinds of skills that you can develop at a job that might not feel like the be all end all job for you. So start, if in this next 6-month period, you end up doing something that maybe doesn't feel like it's exactly your dream job or exactly the thing you wanted to do, use that time to start to develop some of these balancing skills that are going to serve you really well later in life, because you don't need to be doing exactly the thing you expected yourself to be doing in order to cultivate that lifelong ability.
I'll just say too, though, that I think that people ask this question because it's the hardest, for me, it's the hardest thing there is. And it's the hardest thing because, I love my work and I love my life, and I like to pay attention to both of them, but it's also hard because that part of my commitments, which is that I can't put, I love what you're doing and what Will said. And of course, now when I'm the kind of person who somebody says spreadsheet, I'm like, and can we color code it? That would be great. And then, that's perfect. But, my best friend says, life is always too much of one thing and too little of another. And later it'll be too little of the other thing and too much of one. And that is true. And so that you have to find that sense that when my mother got Alzheimer's, I was trying to finish my second book. And my second book took 12 years. And 6 of those were taking care of sick parents. And I, you know what, it wasn't on my list and I didn't really like doing it. I mean, I loved her and I wanted to take care of her, but it was horrible. But, you know, I have that thing. I value it, at least on paper, and therefore I'm going to do it. I'm going to be the person who's doing it, but it is not easy. And it did not feel like, you know, here I am, kumbaya, living the life. You know, it felt like having to live to a certain set of expectations. And anybody who has kids or somebody sick or any of those stuff that happens, you will find that you have to have a bit of willingness to have an unhappy or difficult, sometimes long periods in order to be able to feel like you are doing the thing that being the person that you want to be in the world.
I want to add a little detail about this. I really like everything you've said, all of you said. I think I have a terrible work-life balance and saying it is already part of the solution, but also not crucify myself for it, you know, not getting anxiety, over anxiety of performing. For a long time, I thought getting more organized would be a solution, but it's just worse because I tend to pack more things. The more I'm organized, the more I pack things in my schedule. And one little trick I found out in the past year is to have blank moments during the day, you know, just 3 times 1 minute that I'm just looking at the white wall and not trying to put more input in my brain. And for now, that's enough for me to go on. Wow.
What a way to end this discussion. I feel like that was such a helpful, such helpful insight into what is such an elusive kind of concept. So thank you all. I'm going to briefly share, our panelists have been so gracious to allow us to share their contact information. So hopefully you should now see that. So please do, students, if we didn't get a chance to get to your question and it was geared towards one of our specific panelists, please do take this opportunity to jot contact information down. Again, such an incredibly rich resource that you have right at your fingertips. And we are so appreciative of them taking time out of their busy schedules and their busy lives to come back and invest in you all and share their insight. As Katie had mentioned before, there'll be an email going out to all those who RSVP'd. Just again, thanking you for attending if you did, and highlighting all the different units in the Global Education Center that helped put on this event tonight, along with partners across campus that work closely with us and provide such rich meaning and texture to our students. So again, look forward to that. And thank you so much. Katie, do you have any closing remarks as well?
Thanks, Zach. First, I just want to thank you for moderating. You're so great at this, Zach. And I really appreciate working with you every year on this event. And I can't thank the panelists enough. I feel totally energized after, and I can't thank you enough for the honesty that you provide. This is something that I think our students benefit from most of all, that you tell it like it is. And that was especially true just now with the work life. Yeah, what can we call it instead of balance situation that we all find ourselves in. And you know, we're all trying to figure it out. And some of us have been around a little bit longer and had a little bit more experience, and sharing that with all of you, we're all really open to doing that. And I also speak for my colleagues on the 3rd floor, 2nd floor, 1st floor of the Global Education Center. Please get in touch with us if you have any questions about any of our programs or any of the projects or things that we offer, whether it's a scholarship or a major or a study abroad program. Please, we know you can't come by in person, but hopefully in August you can, but before that, just get in touch. We really want to help you, you know, help you find your way, your next step, and how far that takes you, we'll see. And get in touch with Will for more advice on that spreadsheet, and and the color coding is my favorite part of that too. But really, it's I encourage you to reach out to these amazing resources that we just heard from today. I can't thank you enough. You touched on so many important points, and yeah, we can't wait to meet you all in person. Right, we're all going to be together one day in the Global Education Center eating Med Deli and talking some more. But until then, stay well, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and we'll hope to see you soon.